we're getting set up, we'll just introduce ourselves. So, hi, I'm Jeremy. I work at RedHat. I mainly work with middleware, Java, JBoss stuff that you guys might have heard about. And Alex, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm a something architect. There's a guy yesterday on Twitter, he said, I'm a full stack DevOps. It was a joke, but I thought it's great. So now I'm going to say that I'm a full stack DevOps. Architect.
Architect. So, are we? Yeah, let's go. So we're really just wanting to talk to you guys a little bit about PaaS as a platform for DevOps. Have any of you guys used PaaS? It's like 1, 2. Yeah, well, I know, Peter, you've used PaaS. So we wanted to talk about why you maybe should use PaaS. We're going to try and do some demos, and hopefully the demo gods will be good with us, and it'll make sense. So when we look at traditional application development, a lot of you guys work in startups. This might not be so relevant to you because hardware purchase is probably something that not a lot of people do. But in a lot of big companies that are still doing this, and this is a really long cycle to get your actual application code into production so you can get feedback. What we've kind of mostly all figured out that hardware provisioning is kind of something that is boring, and that's why we're all using infrastructure as a service. I think Just Eat, we're talking about using AWS. It's probably because AWS are across the road. But this is really the first step, basically using virtualization, using infrastructure as a service. But what we've seen is that even when you're using an infrastructure as a service, so you don't have the steps of getting hardware and all that, you still have a few steps to get into production. And actually, business nowadays, and startups and everything, it's all about getting code into production faster. It's all about velocity. It's all about agility. And so PaaS can really help with that because it can actually solve the deployment problem. I think a lot of you guys are probably writing Puppet or Ansible or Chef or Salt scripts to get your deployments into production. And developers are doing a lot of crazy sysops monkeying around. Again, that's really undifferentiated heavy lifting. So we would suggest that maybe you should consider using platform as a service. I'll try and illustrate that with a very short story, right? So some of you are developers and you make code. Operations traditionally run the code, and I think it seems like we've probably got a bit of a mix of people here. How many of you are writing code? Right, actually, and the other half, are you ops side more? Yeah. So we've got a really 50-50 mix. And they're almost all, the developers are almost on this side of the room, naturally. But even if you're a developer, if you're using Amazon or something, this is probably not as true. But you still have this second step. Even if you own your own service, you still have to do a lot of configuration, getting your application code into production. And actually, to be honest, the first time it's not so difficult. It's doing it repeatedly, and it's rebuilding that environment automatically if something goes wrong and so on. So the thing that you can think of PaaS as basically a self-service API, right? It's an interface between operations guys who know how to look after servers and developers who want to put their code into production. If you think about it like that, you can run your own code. Suddenly, because it's a self-service API, it's a defined interface between dev and ops, developers can start to have more control, and they can be on call for their services in a much more defined way than if I'm a developer and I don't know the intricacies of Linux, I'm going to have to call an operations guy to help me at some point, right? I can't be completely on my own. But if the platform takes care of everything for me, then I can get my stuff into code. And because the PaaS does do a lot of things, it can also start to give me some freedom. The bottom line is that there can be less downtime, and I don't know how many of you guys like the last one, but no meetings. How many of you have been into like endless cycles of meetings of like getting stuff into production, right? Yeah. So that self-service API, think about it like that. So we're going to have to do a laptop change. So because it's demo time. So Alex and I are going to be playing. I'm going to be the developer guy, and Alex is going to be the operations guy. Great. So, is there any questions? What do you guys think about that while we get plugged in and stuff? Any comments from the audience?
I'm not sure to understand what you mean by platform. So it can be a lot of things.
Okay. Right. How would I define platform as a service? Let me just plug in. Do you want to give it a go while I get some?
Well, I think that's, you know it when you see one, right? It's difficult to define it, but Heroku, Google App Engine, OpenShift that we are using here, Cloud Foundry, these are what we call PaaS. They're not exactly the same thing, but basically, I think the idea is that you're going to raise the level of abstraction and not talk too much about the infrastructure, but you want to run some code, either because you wrote this code or it was given to you, and you want to run it, and you want to manage the dependencies and run it, and not care about anything else like storage or virtualization or anything like that. And I think that's what they have in common.
Yeah, and oh, by the way, I should say, just because we're at Red Hat doesn't mean that you have to use OpenShift. But because we're at Red Hat, it's pretty convenient for us to demo this. But you could look at Heroku, Google App Engine, and other things out there. But again, as a very small plug, maybe you should consider OpenShift. Typing is going to be really fun with this microphone. There's no clip. Okay, anyway. So just wanted to show you, basically OpenShift is a PaaS, and we think it's a pretty cool one. There's actually three versions of it, three flavors of it. Basically, Origin is like the upstream community where all the code is done, all the latest features. Online is the public PaaS that Red Hat hosts, and Enterprise is basically the on-premise version that some businesses that don't want to put stuff in the public cloud will use. But we have a number of startups that are actually running their entire infrastructure on OpenShift Online. So I'm just going to log into the console here, and this is actually my personal OpenShift login. So I run a whole bunch of WordPress blogs for different people, some different organizations and so on. So you can basically see all my apps running in here. Nothing really exciting to say. You can basically map your main domains onto these. What I'm going to show you here is actually the developer workflow, because I think that's probably the most interesting thing. So if I get my mouse back, right, here we go. Can you guys see the terminal okay? Yeah. So basically, with OpenShift, you have three different ways that you can interact with it. One is on the command line. How many of you guys are command line guys? Yeah, okay, I think that's half. And how many of you use like IDEs and stuff like that? Oh. IDEs are getting out of fashion. Really, a lot of people are not using IDEs, and probably that means that none of you use the web interface. You prefer to just use the command line, right? Or is there some web interface guys? Okay, you provide web interface probably for your guys in the developers, right? So this is the command line. I'm going to show it to you on the command line because that's probably the most relevant for most people. Basically, there's a command that Red Hat provides. It's just a Ruby gem you install, RHC. And so what we're going to do here is basically create a simple PHP application. It's the simplest one to do in a demo in a few minutes. So I should have pressed this a few minutes ago. What this is doing here, and if you think about it from a developer perspective, I need to create a blank image for my application. It needs to host some PHP code if we're still writing in PHP. So believe it or not, PHP is still one of the most popular things for applications on the internet. I need to create a container for it. I need to provision a whole bunch of libraries to it. I need to set up DNS for it. In this case, there's no database, but I might have added a database, a MySQL database, or something like that as well. So what we've ended up here is OpenShift has basically provisioned everything. It's set up DNS. I've lost my mouse. So I'm just going to show you my app is working now. In this particular case, OpenShift's basically just created a really simple scaffold. So let us create a new tab. Paste this in. Right. So this is basically a really simple template application. But what I'm going to show you is the workflow from a developer perspective if I now make a change to it. So bear with me. Or Alex, do you want to hold that for a second? So I'm going to go into the demo directory, which is being created now. What OpenShift did is when it set up my application on the server, it actually created a Git repository on my local machine. So if you look in here, I've got my index.php. So if I buy the index.php, I can actually see, in this case it's not really code, it's PHP, but or am I offending some loads of PHP developers here? No? Okay.
Try harder.
I think I just made a big fuck up in my editing as well.
You?
Yeah. Well, there's no right. So I just get this really strange editing and doing this at the same time. So I'm just going to go.
Let's all code together.
Yeah, let's all code together. Right. So where's my mouse gone? It is the Mac. No, it's not the Mac. There we go. Fuck me.
That don't sound good.
Okay. Q.
Code on Q.
Oh, I did that. Wait.
Yeah, you trust that.
Oh. There we go. See, I'm an IDE guy, but for this demo it was easier rather than firing up an IDE. So what I've done is I've made a modification. So I'm going to do a get commit minus a minus n some changes. Okay. So I've made some changes in my Git repository, and from the developer workflow, all I want to do is basically push my code and see the changes happen. So I'm just going to do a git push. And OpenShift is quite cool because at this point, what it's actually doing is it's using Git hooks to push my code. It's pushing the code up into the origin, which is hosted on the server. But when it does the Git push on the server, then it'll do a rebuild. So in the case of PHP, there is no build, right? It's just all that Git does is restart Apache. But if I had Java code, I would be pushing code up, and it would use Maven to build my project online. If it was Ruby or Python, it would be doing something equivalent. So did my change and my horrendous editing actually work? We'll find out when we see the title. Yeah, hello to OpenShift, right? So this is a trivial example, but the point of it is from a developer's perspective, it's code, it's push, you don't think about configuration, you never did anything with the server. That's the power of it. As you start to use this more, there's a lot more power to it as you start to figure out, to start using this more. Have you guys, just out of interest, has anyone used Heroku? Yeah, I think Heroku is like the most well-known. To some extent, I mean, I work at RedHat, but to some extent, OpenShift is kind of I wouldn't say a clone, but it's an attempt to provide something that companies can use on-premise. The really interesting thing is because OpenShift is fully open source, there's been some really massive innovations. Alex is going to talk about some of the future stuff, but first he's going to do the sort of. You're not going to do future stuff?
Yes.
Oh. Okay, because I think I'm running out of time. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm going to talk instead of doing anything or showing anything. But the idea is that I'm pretty sure if you know Heroku, you've done that before. So, and if you don't know Heroku, you think, well, I can do that. I can build a system like that with a few bash scripts. I hope you're not thinking that. Where were we?
There's a guy in the front row that I think is doing that.
So, yeah, of course, anybody can build that. And my point would be that that's what we tend to do. And that's why it's relevant to discussion around DevOps and stuff like that. You're building a platform anyway. So platform as a service, the name is not great. And I mean, I think the question was relevant because it's not well defined. And I say platform is the more important word. It's like you're building a platform, and the platform is not owned by just developers or by operations or infrastructure or whatever chief platform officer you may job you may create. It's exactly what we are building in common. We're building an application, we're building services, but we are building a platform also, a way to manage all of that, a way to push code to production with processes and so on. And we tend to build it in an ad hoc way as we move forward and develop our stuff that we care about, which is the application. I think that the first thing that I would say would be, it's good to think in terms of the application we are building and say, well, actually we're doing that. So can we reuse some components? I think that it's kind of interesting. It's good to have this level of abstraction where, okay, I want code, I want to write PHP. I don't really care about anything that's behind. I don't even care about, is it running behind Apache or is it using anything else? Am I running a PHP script or is it hosted? Well, of course, you have to care about the platform eventually. But when you are at this level of abstraction, that's not what you want to think about. And at the same time, we don't reuse a lot of components that are at this level of abstraction. We are still talking about the OS, packages, how do I deploy stuff. We are still unzipping tables on servers. Some of us are. Some of us even say they are, and dare say that. So there's, of course, configuration management, and there's a lot of progress in terms of continuous deployment of delivery, depending on how you see it, and people are working on that. But the reality of what you are seeing is that there's not a lot of reuse, except for tooling. So the idea for me of having PaaS and maybe different PaaS services is maybe to move to the level where we'll be able to reuse this component. Maybe that's something that is starting to happen around Docker and the tooling around it, but it's not very clear. Also, you have something in place that where the boring problem have been solved, like authentication, authorization. You have a kind of a framework already if you want to build on top of that. Member of different teams are integrating that platform in that way. You can have stuff like role-based access already playing it into that you wouldn't need to rebuild. And again, I'm talking about level of abstraction because I think that it's kind of yeah, cool. I'm not good at slide decks. The kind of issue sometimes that we have when we talk about dev versus ops and all the questions around operations and building stuff in the infrastructure level and building stuff the application level is that sometimes we don't work at this level of abstraction, so we don't talk in terms of the same components always. And the idea of a platform is that we're going to talk about the same stuff, right? It's kind of a place where you can negotiate. If we need to deploy this component, we have a process, so how do we do that? And you have the deployment process, and I have the application that needs to use these components. And the idea is that we talk at the same level. But what I find interesting also is that there's not a lot in terms of open source or commercial projects that provide this type of platforms ready to go. Compared to the type of usage you see in the industry, it's kind of surprising for me. So in the future, I think that a platform must provide services like log management and metric. There's a lot of talks in the community, of course, around that. There's a lot of great tools. It's kind of challenging to build solutions out of that, depending on the team you have and the experience you have. So I think it's also good to think in terms of a platform that would provide this type of services. I'm not sure it can be done yet, but that's something that we are working on. Also, to use again the kind of image of as a service, metrics as a service, something that is, very much happening in the online world, in the software as a service world, where you can just go to a provider and you can integrate your metrics, you can get this plugin that will allow you to push stuff from your application to this platform. But if you are working on your own platform, there's not a lot of components that you can reuse. There are small components like the actual tools that Graphite and Logstash, Elasticsearch, and all of that. But you still have to build this environment. For some people, they manage to do it, and there's a lot of successful projects, but I still think it's challenging for a lot of other cities. So yeah, I think that platform as a service is something that we are going to see. Certainly the name is going to change, or there'll be new names, or there'll be new projects. There is something happening. I say Cambrian explosion, it's a big word, but certainly around Docker, there's a lot of things happening. And it shows, whatever you think of the solutions, it shows that there's the feeling that there's a need around that to try to have a higher level of abstraction. I'm not talking about packaging, but having a way to deliver something that the idea would be a container image and run somewhere and try to connect all of this together, build some orchestration around that. I think it's also kind of interesting to see so many different ways to do it. And hopefully, the way I would see it in the future, it would be great to have components we can reuse that are not at the OS level or at this level of the library, the tool, but something that is maybe bigger in terms of granularity. Having a platform for integrating metrics, that should be something we could have as a default solution, even if it's not the best or the one we want. And yeah, I like to say that's, of course, provocative, but I like to say, yeah, we need Visual Basic for cloud. Of course, if you think, and if you are part of maybe people who are looking forward and who train on stuff, who learn a lot of stuff, you're part of a small minority, right? And for me, the question that is interesting about communities, how you take the knowledge from maybe the 10% people who are really working on cutting edge stuff and transform that into something that people are going to be able to use. And I said, what we need is Visual Basic for cloud, right? Can you build an application on top of distributed system with failure management and monitoring and metrics and all of that, and give that as something that the majority of developers could use? And I think that's the main goal, even if I can't legally use this name. And that's it.
Yeah. Any questions or comments or anything like that?
Are we going to scale?
Scale?
Yeah.
We obviously, showing scaling would have taken a bit of time, but there's some videos of demoing auto-scaling, so that has to be a fundamental thing that the platform has to provide for your application. As a developer, you shouldn't be thinking about how much resource I'm using. It should just scale my app for me, right? And tell me if my app is misbehaving or going crazy. I can set some limits, but the platform needs to tell me that. So actually OpenShift does that out of the box already. It uses HTTP requests coming in as the default, and you can configure other metrics like CPU or RAM depending on what you're going to do.
Can I ask how many people work on applications or platform or system or services that use autoscale without Because I may have a different take on this, but I don't see everything, but I think that currently not a lot of people need autoscaling. I think it's a great idea in the future we don't. But in reality, I don't see that a lot in real systems environments. And it can be also tricky because there's a lot of layers and components. How do you scale everything? I think it's an interesting discussion, but I don't think autoscaling is just a feature that you enable. So you are going to ask a question.
Security. How do we know that enough developers need to write some horrible PHP SQL injection?
Well, let's be clear, you do know that.
Well, you mean because the platform is shared, right?
Yeah.
But I would say there's a technical way to discuss that, is that you have containers, you have isolation, and you have a level of resource management using C groups, and you have SLAs and all that stuff. That's at the technical level, and that's something you need, of course. But I would say also that we talk about DevOps, right? We work together on the platform. So there's also a level where if you think that the team next to you in the building or the developer is going to be kind of a hostile, build a hostile environment to your application, there's also a team issue here, or maybe a kind of sharing issue. I think for me that's the way I would see it, right? Software is not always the solution to everything. Sorry.
Not hostile, just rubbish.
You work with them, so
that's the unfortunate thing, is that half the time that might actually be the real reason.
It is the real thing.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just my take, is that you're not solving that with software.
Yeah, I guess I would say that the PaaS can protect you from the malicious and the accidental, and it can protect from certain things. But if your code does, even actually, I think PaaS to some extent should try and restart your application if you mess up and you throw some crazy exception or run out of memory. But there's only so much you can do. Yeah, it's not gonna write better code for you.
Because you're passing for. Yeah, so yeah, there's also that, and you can, I mean, obviously you would need to build different environments if you want to do a pipeline where you have test and staging, and maybe there's a whole lot of discussion around that, trying to build automation at a higher level where you would have canary processes when you deploy so that you can roll back if you have an issue. And I think, again, the way, that's my personal view, is that it's not really about features, right? It's more about how you share and try to reuse components. And all of that can be built with a few bash scripts. But the idea is not to rebuild it every time, and maybe to share a little more. But I don't think, again, the way I see it, you don't solve problems with software. Solve problem is people building stuff with software. So you can do that, and there's many ways to do it. It may become something that is integrated in the platform. Maybe that's a few questions I was asking about that. What do we want in the future? Do we want something that out of the box provides all of that, and how can we do that? Yeah, please. Last question.
In your demo, you described having built like Maven and build scripts on the server. Would that be in the production environment as well?
No.
So you have some kind of packaging?
Yeah, you do it for dev, right? So the question is around using Maven in production to build your app. No. So, no, absolutely not. So that's the developer workflow. Typically what you would actually do for the pipeline into production, developers iterating through in his own sandbox environment. Once that's something that he commits into like the main branch or whatever, at that point Jenkins builds a binary. That binary should stay the same. You could still be deploying into OpenShift or the PaaS by doing a binary deployment into the PaaS, bundling all your dependencies. Or if it's Java, it's pretty easy, a war or a here file. And you just promote that through the environments using environment variables, like my database is here, my database is over here.
So there's these defaults around the workflow that you make assumptions it will be a dev workflow and then a production workflow.
Yeah, I mean, basically the PaaS gives you the APIs and hooks to build your workflow into it that you want. So what we see people doing is they build like a dev environment that's more dev test with no deep SLAs, maybe not so much HA, and then they have a production area which has, failover between data centers. That's built into the PaaS. It can do that already, and they just do binary deployment into, through the pipeline. The great thing about having that low the great thing about having a low SLA environment for dev is developers basically are spawning huge amounts of environments all the time. I mean, if you give developers self-service to virtual machines or whatever, they'll consume all the resource, right? So if you have an environment that basically says to developers, you can spawn as much as you want, but if you haven't touched it in 24 hours, we're going to put it to sleep and we're going to put it to disk. If you come back to it, it'll come back to life. that's what PaaS can do as well, and that's what OpenShift does already. So that's useful.
So I think we have time. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Alex.